Good afternoon. Welcome to MIT Bootcamp's e-seminar. Today, we will be learning about how to build a purpose-driven business. The MIT Bootcamp's e-seminars are learning sessions for you to get to know the coaches that will be teaching and coaching at the next MIT Innovation and Entrepreneurship Bootcamp in February next year in Brisbane, Australia. And with me today, we have Priyanka Bakaya, CEO and co-founder of Renewlogy, a firm dedicated to renewing all types of waste. And today we also have Vimala Palaniswamy, who will be moderating the question and answer session. So without further ado, Priyanka, please take it away.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me here today. Thanks for the introduction, Andrew. So yeah, today I wanted to share a little bit with you about my entrepreneurial journey and how I started Renewlogy and how I went about trying to create a business that wasn't just focused on the bottom line, but a deeper purpose. And my hope is that in sharing some of these stories, that it'll help you question what your deeper purpose is and how to create a business around that. So I'll just pull up my slides here. Second. Great. So just as an introduction, I was at MIT Sloan. I graduated in 2011, and I actually started the concept around Renewlogy back exactly 7 years ago, actually, in an energy ventures class at MIT. And it's actually kind of surreal and crazy to me that like 7 years later, I'm actually doing the same thing. Because at that time, it was just sort of a business plan. It was a concept. And, really the concept behind what we do is, as Andrew mentioned, we're focused on this deep mission of renewing all waste. We see each waste stream as having some value and that we shouldn't be wasting anything because everything has some intrinsic value. So our focus has been on non-recycled plastics at Renewlogy. Currently, only 9% of plastic in the US gets recycled, and globally it's not much higher, it's only about 10%, which means that most plastic just doesn't get recycled. It either enters landfills or even worse, it enters the environment and oceans. And, this problem, it just didn't make sense to us when we were, looking at it in energy ventures 7 years ago. We're like, why are we throwing away 90% of our plastic? It never decomposes. And the thing about plastic is it actually comes from fuel to begin with. So we created a company that would focus on converting the plastics back into valuable products. And so what we do at Renewlogy is reverse the process that made the plastic by shortening the carbon chains in the plastic to make fuels such as diesel fuel and giving it some value and making sure that it doesn't end up in landfills of the environment. And that's sort of the deeper purpose we started with. But what I found along the way was that building a purpose-driven business is quite different from just sort of a regular business where you're just focused on creating a go-to-market plan, generating sales, focused on financing to make yourself viable. There's unique challenges with creating a purpose-driven business where you're really sort of truly focused on some sort of bigger goal, whether it's some social goal in terms of empowering communities or an environmental goal where you're cleaning the planet. It really requires you to sort of dig deeper than you would with a regular business, and it often means that you have to be a little bit more careful. A check is not just a check. You have to really sort of think about do these investors or do these customers, really sort of deeply align with our purpose and with our values. So So I was hoping to share some stories about how I sort of navigated that on my entrepreneurial journey, and I hope that it will, challenge you all to consider your deeper purpose. And I think it's, ultimately much more rewarding when you do have that deeper purpose and you're building a business around it, because, once you're really clear in what your purpose is, I feel like everything else just flows, much more, easier from that starting point, and things really sort of fall into place once you've established and communicated that deeper purpose. Without further ado, I'll hop into the 7 steps that I would, recommend you really sort of think about as you either start your own businesses or grow existing businesses that you might have. So step 1 is to, really think hard and define your values. And, one thing that I sort of think about now when I was starting out with our business plan and Energy Ventures was, this whole thing about values. I think I sort of thought it was, maybe some kind of mumbo jumbo. And, I thought, that it was just kind of like lip service. You're writing it down. I was like, obviously what we're doing has some purpose. But it really isn't. It really is the starting point that defines everything from there out. So it really does require you to, really think about, why are you starting this company? What are the values you want to embody and communicate to stakeholders, both within the company and outside the company, and, really dig deep. And it's not something that will come to you necessarily on day one. It will be a journey, and that's okay. Like it's sort of like peeling the layers of an onion to, really kind of realize, what is the deeper purpose. And sometimes it'll come to you from speaking with customers. When we started, I sort of had sort of like, I thought we were solving one problem, but then as I started talking to people, I realized that, there's all these other issues out there, and, we need to sort of really cater to all the, different needs, all the problems out there. So it will evolve over time. But, what I would recommend is, really taking it seriously, not thinking that it's just sort of like some kind of lip service. And what really helps is just writing it down, first writing it for yourself. And then once you have something sort of articulated, make sure others understand what these values are. So whether it's putting it on your website or at work, putting it on the walls so that it's a constant reminder to everyone, talk about it when you're onboarding employees. This is the kind of stuff where it's really small, but it can have like a really deeper impact long-term on the company. And so I think things like this do get overlooked just because, they're seen as sort of a little bit fuzzier than, the sort of the real stuff of, creating a business. But I think if you really sort of take out the time and do these like really small steps, whether it's, writing it down, putting it on your website, putting it on your walls, it can really have much bigger impact than you realize, because it sends a message both internally to your own employees and the team, and then it also sends a message externally to external parties, stakeholders, customers, investors, that you really are deeply committed to these values and you take your values seriously. I don't think you can just assume that people think that because you're doing something good for the planet that your values are necessarily aligned. I think you do, really need to think about it and be genuine and authentic. And I think that definitely shines through whether you're communicating both internally and externally. So that's my sort of first step, first piece of advice is really sort of defining these values, writing it down, and something that I feel that I didn't take as seriously when I started out. I thought there was 100 other more important things, but I would say that this is definitely actually the most important, is this step one. So second step is starting with an A team, and really taking time to seek out mentors and advisors. And again, I think I made a mistake here, that initially when I was looking for advisors, I was looking for people who looked good on paper, that made us seem credible. And there's absolutely no reason to just select an advisor who looks good on paper and provides no value other than their resume. It's just not worth it at all. You should really focus on finding people who at the end of the day have similar values to you, who inspire you in some way, and who you really feel like you can learn from. Because there's no point just having people on a piece of paper. You want really people who are going to make you a better leader. And especially as a young entrepreneur, having those mentors and advisors is really, really critical to help guide you along the way, because there's so much you can learn from people who've already experienced so much more in the business world. And one thing to really consider is all entrepreneurs are going to go through challenges and ups and downs. So what you really want are a set of people who are going to be there for you during those challenging times, and be there to give you good advice. So look for people who've navigated hardships well, people who you can trust will give you good advice when the going gets tough, because that really helps. When you're in the middle of the situation, it's just really nice to have sounding boards to go to, who will give you very balanced and sage advice on how to respond to difficult situations. Something I've learned along the way, that if there's some kind of difficult conversation, that I try not to respond right away. I just sort of step away from the situation, and then I can always go and consult some of my advisors on how best to approach this situation. And I feel like that ultimately is just so much better in terms of for me growing as entrepreneur, to have that those people around who can make sure that I'm responding in a way that's sort of aligned with our values. So those people are really, really critical. And sometimes it's hard to find those people in real life. So something I even do is recently I've been reading Richard Branson's latest autobiography that he just published 2 weeks ago. I strongly recommend it to everyone. But he's an entrepreneur that I've always respected, because I feel like he's really remained true to his deepest values over time. And in the last 2 weeks, as I've been sort of reading his story, I've been thinking to myself, as I face any sort of difficult conversations or situations, I sort of think, oh, what would Richard Branson do in this situation? And that's what you want, your advisors to be people who you admire, who that in any difficult situation, they're going to rise above it in some way, and just sort of set a good example. And so it's good to think about role models like that, who you aspire to be like, to make sure that you're always responding in a way that you're sort of being the role model that you want to be to the world. So having that core team of people to guide you is definitely, I would say step 2 is also sort of very critical in sort of building the blocks to building your business. So step 3, there was a lot of emphasis when I was at MIT on, raising funding, and, that was just sort of it seemed like 90% of our time needed to be spent on, really sort of finding money. And I don't think I really sort of thought about, okay, like what, you tend to be very short-sighted. You're like, I just need money, I need to check. But, you know, I don't think I really sort of took time to think about, okay, like long-term, who are the partners I want as I grow this business? Are they going to, you know, be there, you know, for the whole ride? Are they, you know, what are their sort of motivations? What are their, you know, values here? And I think I was fortunate that I did manage to have a few good advisors at the time. Back in 2011, it was sort of the end of the tail end of the clean tech bubble. And so there were, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs who had raised, you know, huge sums of money, hundreds of millions of dollars from venture capitalists very successfully. But now they were sort of at that point where, you know, they were realizing that these VCs were not actually a very good fit for a lot of clean energy models, because clean energy tends to have a much longer development time than, you know, things like apps in the tech space. And so some of our mentors who I had early on, you know, advised me against the VC route. And, you know, I'm really grateful now that they did that. You know, it would have been really easy for us to sort of catch the tail end of that, you know, clean tech bubble. You know, there were VCs who wanted to give us money, but I'm really glad I followed their advice and sort of avoided sort of all the hype around that clean tech bubble, because, you know, basically the majority of those companies that got those large sums of money from venture capital ended up, you know, fizzling out just because they were pushed too hard too soon before the technologies were ready. And, you know, there were fundamentally some great technologies there, but just because they were pushed to market too quickly, it really sort of ended up destroying the businesses ultimately. So, so you know, big sort of word of advice for any business really is like, whenever you see some kind of bubble or fad, or, you know, something that's sort of really hyped up, you know, really be cautious, because often those bubbles, you know, there might be a couple of cases of people who ride the wave and, you know, manage to get out with a good outcome. But the majority of people who enter those bubbles end up, you know, riding the wave down. So, you know, really be cautious about that. And especially with a purpose-driven business, you do want to be thinking long-term and not short-term, because usually you're trying to solve like very long-term problems. So, you know, that would definitely be, you know, my word of advice. And similarly, as I was mentioning, you know, friends don't let friends sleep with the wrong people. So if you do have the right advisors and mentors around you, they're going to be the ones who make sure that you don't end up taking that money, even though it can be very tempting to take that money. And, you know, I'm really grateful that, you know, we've had advisors who have all basically been very anti-VC, because that would have really been detrimental for us to take venture capital money early on, because we would have sort of fallen into the same trap as a lot of these other clean energy startups. And yeah, just, you know, don't be afraid to, you know, say no. And, you know, if you're forced to bootstrap, if that's the only way you can stay true to your values, it's better to do that than just take the money and then have everything fizzle out in a few years. So, you know, really, you know, the recommendation here is, you know, don't be short-sighted, really try to think long-term. And, you know, VC is not the only type of money. You can get really creative. And, you know, what we ended up doing was, you know, a combination of debt and grants. So, you know, there are other types of financing out there. And if you really sort of think creatively, you know, I think you'll find that there's so much more than VC. You know, only a very small percentage of small businesses get venture capital. And that's because like it really, the VC model only applies to a very small set of companies, and a lot of companies, and particularly a lot of purpose-driven businesses, should be exploring other more creative types of financing anyway. And yeah, so that would be my recommendation on choosing the financing aspect. So step 4 is also related to, you know, taking checks from people. And, you know, again, the advice here is that, you know, not all money is green. You know, all money comes with some kind of strings attached. So, you know, the first thing I learned as we were sort of going to market with our product and talking to a lot of customers who are interested in our product is that you need to have, you know, a really good read on people and a gut feel, because, you know, these customers, especially for us, you know, we enter into these long relationships with our customers. So it's really important that our customers have the similar values to us, and, you know, have sort of the right, you know, character and integrity. And, you know, sometimes I don't necessarily have the best read on people. And you know, I've realized that with time, and that's okay if you're not necessarily like the best, you know, judge of people immediately. I've learned that, you know, I can draw upon others who are better. So, you know, some of our advisors and other team members, you know, I really sort of trust their opinion. And, you know, it's okay to sort of admit that, okay, like maybe I'm not 100% right about people all the time. So if you're not good at this, it's completely okay to get help in terms of trying to, you know, read people, because, you know, sometimes it can be very difficult just from a few meetings to read someone. And, you know, really sort of consider these customer relationships as you get to know them, and, you know, really try to spend time with them. When we have customers visit our facilities, you know, we make sure we, you know, take them out to a few meals and show them around town and that type of thing. And, you know, really get to know them, you know, see, do you like genuinely like them? You know, try to get a sense of, you know, if things get, if there's challenges, if there's tough situations, you know, how are they going to respond? You know, try to anticipate things like that. And, you know, one sort of funny story is with our, we're currently building a facility in Canada for a Canadian customer. And the first time the CEO came out to visit us, it was in the middle of Sundance Film Festival here in Utah. And so whenever people come during Sundance, we always make sure we have lots of tickets to take people out to films. Usually the films are really good. It's the first time they've been released, so there's no reviews or anything. You just kind of go in, but you sort of expect them to be really good. And so I read sort of about this one film, and it's meant to be about the environment and nature. And I thought, okay, this will be a great fit for us because, you know, we're all passionate about the environment. And then it was literally an hour of watching a tree, and there were just like some slight changes to the tree over time, but just like no dialogue. And I was like, oh no, this is like a disaster. Like, I've brought this like important customer to this film of a tree that's just like sitting there and not moving and like not doing anything. Like, what's he gonna do? Is he gonna get up and just like leave? Because, you know, it's kind of ridiculous just like sitting there watching this tree. And, you know, maybe it was like, you know, artistic or whatever, but it, you know, it was really just sort of a tree that was barely moving. And, you know, I was there with like two of my colleagues and him, and, you know, we just started like at some point just like laughing about it, and like, you know, just kind of funny. And I was sort of nervous that, oh no, this guy's just going to be like, what's wrong with these people? But, you know, like he had a really good attitude. And then, you know, we sort of like laughed about it later. And I, you know, realized that, you know, that said something about him, you know, as a person, that, you know, even though we made him watch this like terrible movie about a tree and sit there for an hour, he just sort of, you know, had a good attitude about it. And, you know, I thought, okay, like, you know, this is the type of person that we want to be in a long-term relationship with, that, you know, I know that he's going to, you know, not just sort of erratically respond to situations and sort of, you know, be able to take a step back and like laugh at the situation, which, you know, which I think is good. So anyway, we all still sort of joke about our ordeal with the tree film, which is kind of funny. And, you know, I guess he forgave us and still managed to order a facility from us. And, you know, beyond sort of spending time with them, getting to know them, you know, it's okay to check references and, you know, I sort of joke about stalking, but, you know, like looking online, there's lots of resources online, like the Better Business Bureau and that type of thing, to, you know, really get a sense of these customers who they've done business with before. And, you know, it's also okay to just say no if you feel like someone's not going to be the right fit. And, you know, this is something that, you know, we work in the waste industry, so it can be all types of people with all types of intentions. And we just want to make sure that, you know, people who work with us really sort of believe in the vision of what we're doing as something that's, you know, going to improve the environment and not just focused on this sort of bottom line concept. You know, that's really important for us. So step 5 is, you know, maybe you've gotten to a place where you've achieved some success, you know, you've managed to get funding, you're generating sales, you know, life is great, but, you know, once you get to this point, you know, you should never be complacent with that success. You need to always find ways how you can continue to push the envelope. And, you know, if your purpose really is to solve deeper issues and problems in the world, then, you know, saving the world is never a walk in the park. It always is going to require you to work excessively hard and, you know, always think about what more you can do to pivot towards your deeper purpose. And, you know, so, you know, story with us at Renewlogy is, you know, we started out with this bold goal, which was to offer a solution to plastic waste that was not being recycled and converting it to fuel. But, you know, however, as the years went on, I, you know, got increasingly frustrated because I'd traveled the world and I'd see just a sheer amount of plastic waste that's being generated. So, you know, globally we generate 300 million tons of plastic each year, and that amount's growing by 4% each year. And there's just like no directional change. You know, nothing's really happening from suppliers or consumers to really mitigate this trend. So it, you know, it sort of became frustrating to see that A, it's a problem, and B, it's just, you know, nothing's being done with it. And, you know, we can't just sort of blame the producers of plastic because they're just responding to consumer demand, and it's just sort of stuck in this like vicious cycle. And, you know, we solve one part of the problem, which is, you know, once it's thrown away, we can at least derive some value with it. But, you know, I felt that like we're not really doing anything to just like prevent the plastic from being produced in the first place. And, you know, there's just never a way we're going to be able to tap that 300 million tons. We need to somehow be part of the trend to like reverse the amount of plastic waste that's being created in the first place. And, you know, what I really felt was that it really does have to start with the consumer. At the end of the day, it's small choices that, you know, if we're conscious about it and have the right systems in place, we can, as consumers, we can reverse that trend. So one thing we started this year at Renewlogy was a Waste Zero challenge, which is this fun competition that we do for schools and businesses, where we challenge them over a month to limit the amount of landfill-bound waste they're generating to a small mason jar. And what's great about it is it makes people really conscious about the trash they're generating and really thinking about, okay, what can I recycle? What can I compost? You know, and, you know, what can I stop buying because it doesn't fit in my mason jar? And, you know, I think it's been, you know, really great because, you know, it's now sort of solving the issue at the root, which is, you know, really challenging people to think about, okay, can I just, you know, start choosing alternatives and, you know, trying to do simple things like using, you know, a reusable water bottle instead of buying plastic water bottles, or, you know, carrying your own tote bag to the grocery store instead of taking the plastic bags, or, you know, bringing your own coffee cup places, and that type of thing. So it's these small things, but that can ultimately have a much bigger impact. And, you know, a skeptic might say like, oh, isn't it in your best interest that people keep using plastic because then you can turn it into fuel? But, you know, that's not in line with our deeper values and purpose. You know, we're trying to, you know, stop the trash from being created in the first place. So for us, it's much more important to, you know, really be aligned with our values there. And, you know, if we are successful in getting everyone to stop using plastic, I mean, that's great. And I think once you're really truly aligned with your values, you know, you shouldn't think about, you know, things like that. You should, you know, everything else will fall into place, is what I found. So, you know, really always sort of push the envelope, you know, even if you achieve success in one area, think about, you know, what else can I be doing to really make sure that we're being true to our vision. And, you know, whether it's sort of launching new products or activities like this, you know, there's always more you can do. So always sort of pivot your business towards that deeper purpose that you've set for yourself. So step 6, which is, you know, which can often be the hard part, is that, you know, once you've set a very high bar for values and, you know, establish the deeper purpose, you have to yourself lead by example and stay true to them, because everyone around you is, you know, watching your actions. And, you know, once you've sort of set those high standards, it becomes a very high bar to meet. And, you know, occasionally you'll fail. You know, sometimes there are difficult situations, you know, where maybe I respond to a coworker in a place that, you know, in a way that I'm not proud of. And, you know, sometimes that'll happen. And, you know, it's okay to apologize. There's no one who's completely perfect and who can, you know, really, you know, it's very, very challenging to, like, when you set very high standards, to like always meet them. But I think, you know, just being conscious of it, striving, and, you know, if you fail, it you know, realizing that you are human and it's okay to apologize and, you know, keep trying to do better. And, you know, other times it's just that you've set such a high bar that it becomes hard to meet it. Like with this Waste Zero challenge, you know, I've had to do it myself, and it's actually very challenging because, you know, for me, I've been to so many of these MRFs. They call MRFs the material recovery facilities. It's where, when you put something in the recycling bin, it's where it's sent to be sorted. And so I've seen how much of the material that we put into the bins just is never recycled. So, you know, for me, it's even harder to do the challenge, because I know that, okay, like these materials, even if I put them in the bin, aren't going to be recycled. So, you know, I get very defeated sometimes with how hard it really is to live zero waste. And, you know, someone like me who's like completely educated on it and knowledgeable and, you know, really driven, struggles with it, you know, it's hard for others too. But, you know, it's a learning process, and you have to start somewhere. And, you know, I have to keep sort of pushing myself through it, so that, you know, I can make sure that as I'm promoting these Waste Zero challenges, that I'm, you know, able to say that I'm able to live as close to Waste Zero as possible myself. So, you know, you have to realize that you have to be a role model to those around you as well. So when you set those values and those high standards, it definitely is something where it'll, you know, keep pushing you to be the best person you can be, and, you know, really stay true to those values. And then step 7, which is, you know, I'd say maybe the most important one. Let's see, it's not letting me change my slide. on this slide. Oh, there we go. Step 7 is to make sure you're always having fun. So, you know, people sometimes assume that because you have your own company, you know, you must, and it's something you're passionate about, that you must always be having fun. But, you know, that's not true. You're going to sometimes hit ruts along the way, and, you know, there's going to be challenges, and you're sometimes going to wonder, like, you know, is it all worth it? But, you know, those challenging times are the best times, best opportunities to really dig deep and think about, you know, what else can I do to make sure that I'm aligning with those deeper values, and that, you know, is there a way that I can have even more fun with what I'm doing? And sometimes that requires you to, you know, maybe pivot a little bit, pivot towards your purpose. But I think it's always a good gauge is, you know, are you having fun? You know, usually you'll find that when you're doing something that has impact, and you're living like sort of in line with that deeper purpose, that you know, you'll naturally have fun doing it as well. And something that I remember a lot is that when I graduated from Stanford, it was the speech that Steve Jobs gave at our commencement, which is now pretty famous. Probably a lot of you have heard his graduation speech, but he said something like, you know, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And whenever he hit a point where there were too many days in a row that he wasn't, you know, excited about what he was going to do that day, that, you know, he knew it was time to change something. And those words have like really stuck with me ever since that speech. And it's something I always think about, you know, when I wake up is, you know, am I like genuinely excited about what I'm doing today? And it's important to always like think about that as you're, you know, working on your business, because, you know, maybe, you know, like for us, we've been doing for 7 years, like, you know, sometimes you want to like mix things up a little bit. You know, so for instance, at Renewlogy, our main product are these large, you know, industrial scale facilities that we build for customers. And something that I sort of became increasingly more aware of and started talking to more people about was the issue with marine plastics in the ocean. And, you know, so I thought it would be amazing to be able to have a solution that addressed that as well. And obviously the scale for that is much smaller than our big facilities. So, you know, what we did was develop a small unit for the oceans, and, you know, something that's mobile enough that you can take it to beach cleanups or even put it on a boat itself. And, you know, it's something that wasn't necessarily driven by, you know, we're going to make a lot of money from doing this. It was more just that, you know, it's in line with our deeper values and purpose. And also it's just really fun, you know, like I've been able to go offshore and collect plastic waste in the middle of the ocean, and then, you know, be able to process that waste into fuels. And, you know, for me, that's just something that was genuinely like fun and exciting. And, you know, we started that just out of the, you know, sheer sort of passion of it and not really the bottom line. And I think it's fine to sometimes, you know, mix up your work a little bit like that and think about, you know, how can you, you know, add extra initiatives that you're doing that, you know, maybe it's not something that's going to generate you millions of dollars, but it's just something that, you know, you find you're genuinely passionate about and you're excited about, and, you know, keeps you sort of going, and things like that are, you know, really important. And that's why it comes back to having also those right investors and partners that, you know, when you do want to tell them that, hey, you know, we're going to do this side project, that they're, you know, they're supportive of you and, you know, really see your vision and say that, you know, that's a great idea. And, you know, I think I've been really fortunate that, you know, the people who I have around me, our advisors, do see that deeper purpose and allow us to do those things. And, you know, no one has, you know, told us to like, oh, don't do that because that's silly or anything, which, you know, says a lot about, the people I've been able to surround myself with, that I have that sort of liberty to do things which are just sort of more like passion projects and fun, even if they don't convert into, major revenue generating activities right away. So that's my last slide. So hopefully those 7 steps have given you something to think about as you grow your own businesses. And, there can be more challenges when you are trying to build like a really purpose-driven business, but I think it ultimately can also be the most rewarding thing you've ever done as well. So with that, I will open it up to questions.
Before we get to the Q&A with Priyanka, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the boot camps. So they're a blended learning program that start with the online courses, and you can see in the chat how to reach those. Those are User Innovation and Entrepreneurship 101, 102, and 103. There's also an application page for those of you who are interested in learning more about the boot camp itself. So this is a blended learning program which starts with the online courses, and then there's a 1-week in-person immersive experience, which is the boot camp, which is a 6-day program where you're learning directly from MIT faculty and working with coaches like Priyanka. So in Brisbane, for example, Bill Aulette, who I believe would have taught Priyanka in Energy Ventures 7 years ago, where she came up with this initial idea, will actually be at the boot camp. So the boot camp is a time for entrepreneurs, people who are interested in innovation education, corporate innovators, to come together and learn how MIT innovates. And you get to learn from MIT faculty such as Bill Aulette, and you get to receive coaching from successful MIT entrepreneurs like Priyanka. So it's a 6-day program in Brisbane, Australia. You work on teams. You get the opportunity to be a CEO for a day. So in addition to learning how MIT innovates, you're really working on teams. You're receiving feedback from MIT faculty and coaches on how to work together effectively, on how to really refine your idea, and what's the systematic way to think about innovation, so that when you do face some of those challenges that Priyanka talked about along the way, how do you figure out which direction to pivot to? So these are some of the tools that you'll get to learn and practice during the boot camp. So now I'm going to turn it over to Priyanka. We have a bunch of questions about your business and about really creating a purpose-driven business. And I want to focus on the questions that are relevant to the group as a whole and really on the topic of this, even though there are a ton of questions about your business itself. So you talked about, 7 years ago in Bill's class in Energy Ventures, first hearing about defining your values. And then you've talked about how your values have changed, or you've sometimes had to pivot along the way. Could you talk to us could you tell us what your values are for your business and how they've evolved over time?
Sure, yeah, thank you. That's a great question. They've definitely evolved over time.
Priyanka, can you unmute?
Oh, it's mute? Okay. Let me see.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Does that work? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, it works.
Perfect. So yeah, when we started out, I think, we were in Energy Ventures. So I think in terms of our identity, we saw ourselves as a clean energy startup. And, what I realized with time is that the problem we're solving actually isn't really to do with energy. The problem we're solving is really to do with waste. And that was sort of like a bit of an identity crisis shift for us, where our values sort of evolved, because as I started talking to our customers, I realized like really the problem we're solving is for the people who are producing this plastic waste, because the amount of fuel we're making is actually not that big. It's a drop in the bucket compared to sort of global oil, as an industry. Whereas, the plastic waste, that's really where the pain point is. And so that required some sort of reframing, who we were as a company. And, one thing that we did along the way is change our company name. So we started out as PK Clean, and that PK Clean, the reason we used the word clean was, I think we saw ourselves as a clean energy company. PK, as an aside, was just was the initials of a mentor who had been an inspiration to me in my childhood, Percy Keane. So I sort of named the company after him. But for us, I realized that the clean energy isn't really our identity. Really, what we're doing is we're an environmental solution provider for waste problems. And that's why we went with this name Renewlogy, because it really sort of encapsulates more of what we're doing in terms of trying to renew the waste. And the ideas around circular economy have also developed over the past 7 years in terms of more awareness about trying to close the loop on the waste that we're generating. So those values have evolved over time, as we've made the shift away from defining ourselves as a clean energy company into more of, a circular economy company. And that'll happen, things will change, both externally and internally. And it's okay to keep sort of redefining your values based on what's happening in the global environment.
I thought it was interesting how when you brought up your values, you're talking about them from a company perspective, but you also talked about living them. And it even translated in how you treat people both within the business and outside of the business. Can you talk about other ways that either your personal values have affected Renewlogy, or how your pivots in Renewlogy have affected your personal values?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think at some point it becomes completely blurred. You can't, when you're a founder, you can't really separate yourself and be like, okay, this is my business persona and then this is my personal persona. I think they both just sort of influence each other so heavily that you have to make sure that how you're living your personal life is really sort of in line with your values at work, what you're defining. So, I think it's interesting how the values of a company are so, deeply set by the initial founder. And I don't think I sort of assumed that, okay, it's a team and like everyone's values will like impact it. But I think that founder has such a profound impact. And I think you see it a lot when you look at sort of popular startups, in the media, like, Uber, and just sort of how the culture that was defined by the leader sort of stemmed down to the rest of the company. Like what you do is just so defining, and that puts so much pressure on the founder, because not only are you expected to create, this business and, generate sales and financing, it's like you're defining the values of the company. You have to like live to these, up to, these standards. So it's a lot to, really sort of hold yourself to.
And so, you're talking about holding yourself to these values. How do you get buy-in? We've had a lot of questions about different stakeholders in your business. So from employees to investors to customers. So how do you bring them along? How do you communicate your values to them? What's the, I guess, the line?
Yeah. So, writing those values down is, the first step. And then, for any customers who initially find us on our website, we have those sort of values, written on the website. So that's the first thing they see. And then, when it comes to bringing people onto the team, as part of the onboarding process, we reiterate those values. We have, quotes and things like all around the office, sort of reiterating what our values are. So I think it's those, very, sort of small and subtle things that can have like a big impact. And it's, it's not enough to just sort of give like the lip service. Like it has to be really genuine and authentic. And, they have to see that the person they're speaking with is really sort of embodying these values. And, I make sure like in our conference room, we never have like plastic water bottles, because that would like, not be in line with our values. So, we have, a pitcher and glasses and that type of thing. And, similarly, if, any meetings, I make sure that I think subtle things like, I'm carrying my own water bottle, or, my coffee cup, like this is a bamboo fiber coffee cup, and, like things like that, where I have to make sure that I'm not just sort of, egregiously just like using plastic all over, because, that's not in line with our values. So, that becomes important, those sort of small things.
And so how do you, I've definitely been in partnership discussions or talking to a potential employee, and you kind of know when your values do align, or you come to it somewhat organically. Are there other ways, have you had more explicit discussions when you've entered into either investor relationships or partnerships with your clients?
Yeah, you mean in terms of like just sort of checking that their values are in line with our
Yeah.
own? Yeah. Yeah, I think, definitely, one thing that, both with investors, advisors, I sort of lay out our company mission, and that, yes, like, we have these like large systems that, this is sort of the bread and butter, this is how we're making money, but we're going to be doing these side activities, whether it's like these ocean initiatives, or waste zero challenges, because that's just sort of part of who we are. And, I make sure that they're on board with that, even though those might not be, revenue generating activities for us. So those are the types of conversations I have with them, that, this is the vision, these are our milestones, short term and long term. These are certain things that are going to make us money, and these are some things that we're doing because it's the right thing to do, and make sure they're okay with that.
So that actually leads into another question that a lot of people have had. Sometimes there might be a trade-off between your values and a financial decision, and so one is sticking true to your values, one could affect the long-term viability or even the short-term viability. So how do you evaluate those decisions, and how do you make that decision?
Yeah, and that's when it becomes really difficult, when, like say you're in a position where, okay, the company is going to shut down, or you have to stay true to your values, it can be really like that drastic. And sometimes it's hard to make those decisions on your own. And that's why having people around you is, who you can really trust to give you really good advice is really important, because I don't think, maybe there are founders who can make these decisions on their own, but I know personally, yeah, I'll have a gut feel, but I need to also check with these people who I really respect and admire, what would they do in that situation? So, having that core team of people around you who you can really go to in those like challenging situations, to be like, is it worth it? Is there a way to balance this situation and somehow optimize? There's always like, things are never quite black and white. You might think, okay, either it's this or this, but really good entrepreneurs who've been doing it for a while, that I've been able to learn from, are able to find these like gray paths in the middle, which can really sort of try to find the best of both worlds. And you want to have people like that who can really find those gray paths in the middle, where you can sort of balance all the objectives, to sort of help guide you. And, I'm not saying that I always will have the answers, sometimes I just sort of see the black and white, but, having people around you to help you like see that, there might be a way to balance those situations. So.
And what do you do then in the situation where you have people who might not adhere to your values? So it could be a team member, and you find out that either your values have changed or their values have changed, and they're no longer consistent.
Yeah, and those are the hardest situations, because initially you can give them feedback and make it known, like make it clear to them that what they've done is sort of out of line with the values that we believe in. But there's only so many times you can do that, and it's something that's like hard for me, because I'm tend to be sort of anti-confrontational. I try to be very positive, but I have to give them that feedback. And unfortunately, like sometimes it does come down to a situation where there's a bad apple, and you just have to they're going to cause more long-term harm than good. And they're having difficult situations like that, where people have had to go, and you just sort of have to understand that, you know, that's just part of business, that, you know, not everyone's going to be in line with your values, and, you know, what someone was sort of what you thought they were isn't necessarily, you know, what they ended up being, or maybe they changed along the way. And, you know, those are some of the hardest decisions as a company. But when you're a small team, like having sort of one bad apple is just like not, can really do a lot of damage to the rest of the company. It's something that I've learned the hard way over time. But yeah, it's just something that you have to, you know, learn as, you know, an entrepreneur, that, you know, someone who's sort of negatively affecting the culture can, you know, really bring down the company. So you have to take a strong stance.
Okay, great. And I think we're coming to an end. And so I just wanted to wrap up and then see if you had a couple tips that you could offer people for how they can discover their true purpose. But my takeaways from your talk were to really define your values, to think long-term, to surround yourself with good people who are going to help you stay on that path or create that path for you, to be flexible and open to pivoting within your values, and then to really stay true to yourself. But do you have a couple tips that you could give people on really finding that purpose?
Sure, yeah. I mean, one thing that really works for me is journaling and writing it down, because, you know, these values will change with time along your journey. And, you know, there's a lot of benefit from just, you know, putting pen to paper and just, you know, really sort of exploring. And some questions that I ask myself are, you know, what would my childhood self, you know, want me to be today? You know, the more morbid ones are like, you know, if I only had 6 months to live, you know, how would I be living my life? Is this, you know, what I would be doing? You know, that really helps you kind of hone in on, you know, what your purpose is and what you find meaningful. Like when you really sort of think about, okay, that we're going to die eventually, or, you know, just sort of thinking about when I'm on my deathbed, you know, what would I have been proud of having done with my life? And I think when you ask us, you really sort of dig deep and ask yourself those sort of deeper questions, it can really help you sort of peel the layers of that onion back and, you know, really think about what is my true purpose, and, you know, what do I find meaningful? And ultimately it's like, what do I find fun? You know, this should be like fun. It shouldn't be hard work or anything. It should be something you really genuinely enjoy. So.
Okay, great. Priyanka, thank you. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing what you've done with Renewlogy, and, you know, how you continue to use your values to really drive what you're doing. We're looking forward to seeing you in Brisbane in a few short months. And I want to thank all the participants who joined us and who asked lots of great questions. Let me hand it over to Andrew just to wrap up.
All right. So thank you for the time here. Thank you, Priyanka, for sharing your story. Next week, as Vimala has shared, we have the MIT Bootcamp info session and question and answers. Erdine and Vimala will be sharing about the next bootcamp, and we'll be answering all your questions, and we hope to see you there. Until the next one, have a great week, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.